All right, good evening, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, August 13th, and what's the big story out there?
Well, the upcoming meeting in Alaska, continues to hog the headlines. So I have to say that's the big story. Um, yeah, before we were getting rumors about what had been said between, Witkoff and Putin. Now we're hearing about the conversations that were held between Trump and various European leaders and Zelensky. And yeah, that's and it sounds like the way they're talking is that nothing has changed. It's still the same old, I guess you could call it the Kellogg plan. Basically, if a ceasefire first, and then basically no concessions to the Russians other than temporary de facto recognition of the territories that they currently occupy, but no de jure recognition, no promises to keep Ukraine out of NATO. Really nothing else. And I think Zelensky is still talking about Crimea and war reparations and everything. He hasn't budged from his so-called peace plan. So we're not seeing, a whole lot of movement on the other side, let's say on the European and Ukrainian side of things. And then, Zelensky claims, and the way the other European leaders like Merz talking, it sounds like Trump is on the same page with them. At least they think he is for now. But we've seen that happen before, where they all think they're on the same page, and then Trump goes off somewhere else. We'll see what happens in the actual meeting.
How much influence do you think these guys have? Zelensky, Kellogg, the European leaders?
Um, I don't know. Kellogg is like, it seems like he kind of goes in and out of the doghouse. Sometimes he's clearly influencing the president, and then you don't hear about him. So I don't know. It kind of is. I don't know what the current relationship between Kellogg and the president is right now. Now, I think everybody knows that Trump has nothing but contempt for the European leaders, but they may still have influence on him. I mean, he can't disregard them entirely. And Trump seems to be a very kind of, let's say, easily influenced kind of person. So I'm sure the conversations have had some effect on him. Um, yeah, but when it'll come down to it, I guess Putin is gambling that if he has a few hours with Trump, he can make a difference. Again, like I said earlier, I don't think he has any illusions that he can actually persuade him to completely change course and then to stick to that course. That's just not Trump. But if he can have his say, and I think that will affect Trump. That will make it easier for him to to ignore the advice of other people. Again, Trump is the only thing I think that you can safely predict about Trump is that he will make reversals. He will change course. If we just look at the past several months, we've seen that happen already. There are times when it says, "Well, look, he's actually." It looks like he's on course to reach some kind of agreement with the Russians, and then we, all of us become in the dissident media become rather optimistic, and then there's a sudden reversal, and he's just talking like Joe Biden again, and and then we all become gloomy, and then there's all of a sudden there's seems to be some kind of breakthrough. I think we to be honest, we have to expect that this was just going to continue to happen. This is the Trump presidency. It's going to be a lot of, a series of, there are going to be reversals, there are going to be changes of course. And in the end, I don't know what it'll add up to. I think, I believe Putin understands that, and he knows that he can't really, you know, like seize the reins or convince Trump to stick to one course. Nobody really can. But if he can influence them so that maybe it's only in the direction of inconsistency. If he can influence to the point where, yeah, when Trump gets sick of these guys who are telling him to do, to escalate against the Russians, he thinks about his buddy Vladimir and gives him a call, and then we have another, at least temporary course correction.
Yeah, within the dissident community, it seems like there are two camps forming. There's one camp that is saying that this Alaska meeting, it's all deception. It's a trap. The most charitable case to be made is that America is just buying time because they don't know what to do. And then the most uncharitable case is that they might actually go do something to Putin, try to start World War III. There's this case, there's, people in the Brian Berletic camp, the continuity of agenda, that this is just what the United States does, and we've seen it time and time again. And there's a lot of evidence to back it up that does seem to be what happens a lot of times. And then there's the other camp that Trump does actually want to end this war, and we've seen a lot of this being echoed as well. Just him on the campaign trail, him coming even from a moral standpoint, saying, "I just want to see people stop dying. I want the killing to end. This war needs to end." Him promising wanting to end the war. So that's the charitable case that he does want to end the war because he's coming from some type of, that is his genuine position. And then there's also, he may want to end the war because the battlefield reality is getting so grim right now that we are looking at a more rapid collapse, that Ukraine is losing territory at an increasing rate now. So he's got to stop it now before it just looks even worse. Where do you lie in that? Which camp do you kind of prescribe
Yeah. Well, okay, let's see. The first camp is that this is essentially a trap. And Trump is play acting.
A trap, or just something to buy time, not necessarily,
Yeah, well,
which is a
yeah,
trap, I guess, in a sense.
yeah, of a certain sort. I guess, well, it's not necessarily a trap. I think you look at it again, when he made those threats, again, there was the most recently friendly, stage ended several weeks ago. There was a time where relations between him and Putin seemed to be good, and they seemed to be headed in the right direction. And then there was that phone call between him and Putin, and after that, Trump was complaining about it, and then he started, actually referring to Putin in unflattering terms, and then he began to talk more and more about sanctions, and then he made specific threats of sanctions. It was going to be 100%. Initially, it was going to be 50 days, and that would be September 2nd. And then he moved it up, and he moved it up again. And then it was August 8th. And it was shortly before August 8th that they agreed to reach the summit. And as we, and I think anybody that had any understanding of trade and economics, and of what the recent economic war between the U.S. and China, he could not make good on those threats. I mean, there was some question in my mind about India, and I think towards the end they thought, well, maybe we can try India. They didn't even make any attempt to slap those 100% tariffs on China. So I think, like, soon after he made that threat, there's a lot of people kind of just pulled him aside. Hey, Trump, we can't do that. Remember when we tried doing that last time? And so, he was just quiet about China. So the hope was they could do something with India, but that failed. We saw that. And so he was in a difficult place. He has to get out of it. And his stick approach did not work. The use of the threat and sanctions failed to produce results, and he was going to find himself, with a lot of egg on his face. The deadline was fast approaching, and people would start asking him very embarrassing questions. He didn't really have any answers. So, yeah, this is a way you could say, kind of just to wriggle out of it, just in that sense. I think he does have a sincere belief, a sincere hope for some kind of settlement and an end to the war. He said that often enough, and I don't think actually Trump is really much of an actor. I think he's quite the reverse. He really does express his thoughts too openly, more openly than a president of a major country should. When things come to mind, he blurts it out. He doesn't seem to have any kind of filter. So I think he's sincere. He has his hope, but it's like I've pointed out, the problem is he just doesn't have the understanding, the commitment, the team under him, to realize that hope. He just doesn't have it. So I think he is going there with some sort of hope of settling this, that this isn't some sort of trap. Now, it may look like a trap when it's all over, because it will fail.
You sure
If he
it
was,
will?
yeah, I mean, he's not going to, there's not going to be any settlement to this war. The war will go on. I don't see how. I would be very, very surprised that I don't think he can give Putin, the Russians, what they are demanding. And I think again today, I believe it was either the Ministry of Defense or the Foreign Ministry that reiterated that those four oblasts, again, Zaporozhye, Kherson, Donetsk, and Lugansk, are Russian territory, and that cannot change. It's something that Putin himself has said again and again, and the people around him said again and again. And I think even if Putin wanted to or was thinking about it, he would, that would put him in serious political hot water. I think, I just don't see, nothing's impossible, but I don't see Putin giving him or rather Trump giving Putin what Putin needs to end this war. I don't see that happening. And then the talk that you're getting from the administration and from the Europeans show that, at first it looked like maybe there was some kind of movement. Maybe when Witkoff was going there, that perhaps there was some agreement, like maybe we're going to ask the Ukrainians to pull out of Donetsk. That's a rumor. I don't know if that ever, was part of a deal, but that's a possibility. I mean, that, and the Russians saw some movement and said, okay, maybe we should talk. It looks like they're finally moving. Now it doesn't sound like it. And I really don't think, I just don't see how Trump can do it. I just don't think he's capable of it. So again, I don't see how this can succeed. Now, there are things that the Russians and the Americans can solve. You should focus on the things that you can do, rather than put all your energy into the impossible. And the things you can do is you can restore diplomatic relations to where they were before 2022. You can restaff the embassies. You can reestablish direct flights between Russia and the United States. You can work on arms control, very important. And really, you're talking about the, world peace, that's even more important than this war. These are all things that they can work on, and there's no reason why they can't. But, I don't know that Trump has sense enough to do that. It seems like, as Putin himself said, when I guess it was at the Volyn Monastery with Lukashenko, he says, if you have excessively high expectations, you're just going to be disappointed. That if Trump goes for the impossible, and he thinks that, just by talking to him, without actually making, any realistic concessions, without really acknowledging the reality on the ground, I can somehow convince him to do this, well, he's going to fail. And there's a chance, I don't know how, I guess Putin's going to work hard to try to build up a rapport with Trump, and maybe he will really succeed in that. And maybe, Trump will come out of even if there's nothing substantive, Trump will come out of the meeting in a good mood. And that good mood, it won't last forever, but again, just by maintaining this relationship, I think it helps the Russians. You see Trump's erratic, but if he understands that Putin is one of his friends, when he gets stuck again, like he got stuck this time, he'll go to Putin, right? And talk to him. Maybe Putin, in a way, Putin, pulled his chestnuts out of the fire. He was coming right up against this. I mean, you could say, look at it this way. This is kind of a favor that Putin did for him, right? That August 8th deadline was right there. It was going to be a huge embarrassment for Trump. And then Trump gave him not Trump, but Putin gave him an out. And I think at some level, Trump has got to understand that. I think he understands those kind of things very well. And, even if this meeting is just nothing but, handshakes and smiles and whatever, that can make a difference. Again, Trump's going to be in other situations, and he may, and he's going to be with people pushing him to escalate, and he may just think, oh no, it's time for another meeting. We got to work on our another summit, change the focus of the conversation, change the, the change the narrative to some extent.
So you really think that Trump will never accept the 4 oblast? He will never say that those can be Russian?
Well, he might even want to at some point. I don't think he really cares um, about Ukraine and Zelensky. But I think the people around him have just said, you cannot do that. You just cannot do that. There's, I don't know that there's anybody who's telling him that he can and that it'll be okay. I mean, that would just be, there would be cries of treason and it would lead to a great deal of hysteria, backlash. The usual suspects, the media, and of course the Democrats, but a lot of people within the Republican Party are going to be upset about that too. To be honest, again, I don't think the voters really care all that much one way or another. I don't think it really would hurt him, in their eyes, but it's going to hurt. It's just he's going to have the whole establishment against him, and he's just. Sometimes, Trump, like again in those first months, he'd go out and he'd say things against the establishment. I mean, he'd say things that you're not supposed to say, and you think, wow, maybe this guy is really different. And he is, in one sense, really different from other politicians. But he's just never able to follow through on it. And I remember this from his first term, too. And so I just don't have any hope that he can. I mean, that he can really, he may, if he had chosen the right people around him, and again he had a well-disciplined, high-powered team, that's something maybe he could do. But even then, like with the best team in the world and the most articulate president of the world that has all the facts at his fingertips, you're going up just against such a powerful force. I don't know. The only thing that he could have done, I really think, is that realistically is walk away from that, and maybe. I think the chance for that, it was always really quite small. That would be very hard to do. Now it's a little bit, I would say it's not impossible. You do have J.D. Vance essentially saying that this is not our problem. Let's walk away from that. So he does have people around him who would support him in that. But it's going to be hard. And he's got to be disciplined. I don't know that he can hold it. And then when the lines started to crumble more and more rapidly, and we are seeing, as you pointed out, an accelerating beginning of a collapse, a true collapse, at least on like just north of Kursk recently. It's a relatively small area, but it just collapsed. We saw that. That just may be I think we're going to see more and more of those kind of situations in the future. But then when it becomes a major collapse, can he really? It's going to be really hard, when people are saying Trump lost Ukraine. Trump lost Ukraine. You know how it's going to be, and does he really understand? I think maybe he does. So he's, I just don't think he can be disciplined enough to handle that. Again, the time to have done that would have been early. It's not impossible now, but it's nearly impossible now. But there is the fact. Okay, that actually we are running out of arms, So in a sense, it almost doesn't really matter all that much. We can continue to provide them with a certain amount of arms, just drawing from monthly production. But it's not nearly enough. It's clear. And it's going to get worse, before it gets better, if it ever gets better. I don't know if it will. But just if he goes out and says, we're not doing this, we're washing our hands of this affair. And then the collapse happens. And it may not even have anything to do with the decision that he made. It's just the fact that, all the trends were heading that anyway. But he'll get the blame. If he's, says we're going to stand with them as long as it takes, all this kind of rhetoric, he insulates himself from the blame that's, going to attach to to whoever it is in office when Ukraine is lost.
It just feels like it shouldn't be too difficult of a sell. I understand it's not easy, but first of all, Russia already holds most of that territory. It's a reality, I think, to everybody that they're not getting any of that back if they're holding it. Maybe they can get some back in the Sumy regions, Kharkov regions, like you said,
Yeah,
as part of to claim a land swap, and
right.
then they get the four oblasts. And then you also have just the precedent from Kosovo. Right. I mean, we did this. The whole UN Charter, the right to self determination. There's referendums that were held, and all these oblasts, overwhelming majority said that we wanted to be part of Russia. So he can use the Kosovo referendum, as precedent for this. Like, this is what we have. Like, this is the will of the people that live here. These are people that don't want to be part of Ukraine. They were fighting the people in Western Ukraine for 8 years prior to the launch of the SMO. This is part of the whole problem. Let's get this peaceful split. He has reality and the truth on his side. If he just tells that narrative, not the narrative, the truth, just tells that the truth to the people, I think people will, it will, even if there's all this spin machine to try to discredit it, that the truth, that seed gets planted in people's mind. And he has a big enough megaphone and platform. He just do his all caps tweets about it all day long.
Yeah, well, that's what he should be doing. He should have started that a while ago, and he should have had, again, a disciplined team working with him to do this. I guess part of the problem is that okay, he's been rather inconsistent. Sometimes he goes against the narrative, but often, probably more often than not, he goes with it. He watches Fox News, and he does repeat a lot of these, of the usual American talking points, if we want to call them, or Western talking points. So it's he and his administration and the establishment, both Republican and Democrat, have been pushing this narrative, for a long time, and we leaped on those few exceptions, like when Trump says, well, they had a reason for. They were provoked. We were expanding to the east. He did say that once. NATO. He did mention NATO expansion. Once Marco Rubio referred to the war as a proxy war. These are things, but these are actually few and far between. And in general, they push the narrative, and it's really hard. And one of them is too. This is just a unprovoked invasion, and they're all Ukrainians. There's no differentiation between Eastern Ukrainians and Western Ukrainians. And clearly there should be, because it is a very, ethnically and linguistically divided country. And it's just like the Western media hasn't bothered to tell anybody about this at all. Now, all of a sudden he's going to start having to tell people about it. It's going to be hard, to undo, all the lies that you've been telling. And again, it's not just the opposition that's been telling these lies. Trump's people, the Republicans, and Trump himself, more often than not, has been telling the same lies. I say, now I'm going to start telling you the truth. I don't know if he can pull it off. I was just reading, I finished reading that book, Manufactured Consent by Gareth Porter. Is really a history going of the Iranian nuclear program up to about 2013. And he mentions what I remember thinking at the time, that Obama actually, again, he did get this peace deal. But a mistake that the JCPOA, but a mistake that he made was that, like in the early years of his administration, he was feeding the same old narrative, these deceitful, you can't trust the Iranians, so on and so forth. And it actually made it really hard for him to change course. He was able to get this deal, but again, I think one of the reasons the deal didn't last, it's not just that it was not just Trump, is that he failed to change the narrative. And he himself, it's like he joined the narrative and then it became impossible to go against it. And I would like to think that, but I don't see, I don't see it happening now. I just don't think, I think they're stuck in their own narrative. And so the best we can hope for is chaos, for inconsistency. And I think that's what we're going to continue to get. And maybe that's what Putin's going to get from this meeting. It's just that I don't see that we can get anything more than that. And one thing, I should point out, I mean, the that we have to give Trump and his administration credit for the fact that they did escalate in the Middle East, actually where Biden didn't. He always actually worked hard to prevent war between Israel and Iran. They went all out, to try to come up with these, the demonstrative missile strikes and all that. But of course, Biden was always escalating in Ukraine. Now, Trump stopped the escalations. He has stopped the missile attacks into pre-2014 territory. And to this date, there haven't been any, to my knowledge. And that is very important. That was something that took us, just much too close to the chance of a nuclear conflict, of a World War III. And Trump hasn't done that. So far, he hasn't escalated. When recently he did go after the Russians, or threatened to go after them, but he was going after them with sanctions. He's shown it seems to me, a real reluctance. There was some talk, like maybe he was thinking of tomahawks, and we don't know if this is true or not, if he actually ever really said it, but it was reported that he was bringing up the issue of tomahawks in a conversation with Zelensky, but he's never acted on it. And let's hope to God, if just by maintaining some kind of, maybe not exactly friendship, but, some sort of friendly relationship between Putin and Trump, we can keep Trump from going down that road of escalation, then it's all worth it.
Well, I hope so. I mean, there was also the Operation Spiderweb who knows if Trump was aware of that, but that was an attack on, Russia's nuclear triad. That was obviously a major escalation. It sounds like it was more of an MI6 operation, but
Right.
still, it's hard to know.
Right. It's not clear that Trump knew about it. I mean, he may not have known about it. I think there's no question the CIA had to at least have known about it. I think there's no question about that. But they may, like we've learned in the past, in his first term, they sometimes just kept him in the dark. They just sometimes, occasionally, like when he ordered them to leave Syria, they didn't carry out his order. So there is
treason, right?
Yeah,
it's treason.
Yeah,
But nobody gets punished. Nobody gets punished.
Yeah, no.
I mean, so I'm hoping that maybe the best case scenario is Trump and Putin unite and realize that they are fighting the same enemy, the intelligence agencies, the deep state, that are wanting these wars and manipulating it and not letting and tying Trump's hands. Yeah. I also think it might be a bit of a mistake to say that Trump can get stuck in his own in a narrative. Just if there's anything about Trump, I don't know if he gets stuck. He can just make 180s whenever he wants. So It's true. He can be completely in there and be parroting something and then just flip on a dime one day and be like, everything I said the past 3 years, whatever. I don't know. That was somebody else. I never said that. Fake news,
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess the thing is, that's true. But these 180s, in the end, the narrative seems to win.
180s again.
Like he'll do the 180 back. He can't, it's just never, he can't stick to it. So he starts, heading back in the opposite direction for a while. Just think about what's happened in the last few months. It was not too long ago, I guess it was back in May, that there was talks, we're ready to slap sanctions, like the Europeans and the Americans. We'd all gotten, together, and apparently everybody was on the same team. And then Putin had that midnight conference on a weekend and, put forward the idea of having direct negotiations with the Ukrainians. And then immediately Trump responded, and like you could see like the utter disbelief on the face of people like Mertz and so on. Like they thought they had worked this all out, and then Trump was just over there. Yeah, let's go talk to Putin. And so we had this kind of a 180 right there. And then we had the meeting, and for a while afterwards, Trump was real positive, no talk about sanctions. And then he started to sour after a time. Then we went into the sanctions and direct threats of, 100% sanctions or whatever. And now again, we have this is something we've seen before, and we've seen similar things earlier. And I think this is the pattern that we're going to continue to see. I think it suggests, like, if Trump, had his druthers, he probably would just make a deal with the Russians. But he has everybody against him, and he just, again, like the most effective president ever, would would have a monumental battle. It's really changing the U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia. And I think in any case, Trump is just not that person. He's just not. He does very well in certain kinds of settings, but I just don't think he has the let's say the personality, the intellectual rigor and so on and so forth that are necessary to fight these forces. And so the narrative, though, yeah, he's not, you're right to say that he's stuck in the narrative. It's not right. He actually pops out of the narrative every once in a while, much to the dismay of the people around him. But the narrative is like, it does end up getting a hold of him and start pushing him back, again, till the next time that he jumps out of it.
Right. So you're thinking that it's unlikely they will settle much or if anything, agree on anything with regard to the Ukraine war, but that they will pursue potentially other topics, talk maybe developing the Arctic, normalizing relations, potentially, what was arms treaties as a big one. But
right, I hope so. I don't know if that's going to happen. I hope so. Those are the things that are doable, and that's what they should be focusing on.
I was going to say, though, are they that doable, though? I mean, how can it be doable when you are engaged in a war with each other? Sure, it's a proxy war, but this is a U.S. war versus Russia. Doesn't this need to be resolved before we can start saying, well, let's go and develop the Arctic together and have a good time, and you guys come over and visit our embassy? It's like, look, the United States military is being attrited to nothingness. Our whole empire is collapsing because of this conflict. We're pouring everything we are in there. Ukraine has lost an unbelievable amount of men. They are running out of people. This whole thing is blowing up, and we can't just pretend to just let's restart these arms deals when we're engaged in a conflict with each other. This has to be resolved first. So and it's a little bit depressing to think that Trump that you think that it's unlikely that Trump would ever even consider giving those 4 oblasts. Because my concern was that will Russia be okay with just giving those 4 oblasts? Because I imagine most of Russia now is saying, no, we need Odessa. Those are our brothers and sisters there too. We need to connect to Transnistria, Kharkov as well. We need to liberate those people. We can't leave them by under this Banderite regime. So we need to go to the Dnieper at least, and we need to get to Odessa and connect to Transnistria. That's kind of what I'm thinking is like the best middle ground is if we get those 4 oblasts. It's like maybe that's the compromise we can do. That's something that had the referendum. Yeah. Those were what Putin consistently said. These are part of Russian territory. That's not it. Just be hopeful that Russia doesn't demand more because they have the right to take it. I'm not the right. They have the ability to take it, and they have the support within those regions to be there. So like they have the support within their own country and in those places that they're going to be going. So it's just pray that you can say those 4 oblasts, Putin will accept it. And if you're saying that Trump can't even say it, then I'm just like, well, what are we doing here? Because I don't even know if Russia would accept this.
Right. Well, I think, again, Putin laid it out June 14th of last year, right? That these were the Russian demands, and they have restated not just Putin himself, but Lavrov and Peskov and all of them. Again and again, they have restated these are the demands. They've made it crystal clear. These are the demands. Now, these are described as maximalist demands by the West, but I think you're right. Actually, they're not maximalists. These are the minimum demands. There are a lot of people in Russia, as you point out, who would actually be very disappointed if the Russians settled for that. So these are really their minimum demands. And again, if there was just a glimmer of intelligence and awareness, self-awareness, within the West, or just an acknowledgement of the reality, they would take this. This is a deal. This is a deal I think Putin can make good on this. He'll get some flack from it, but this is something the Russians would accept by and large. His government, his people, a lot of them wouldn't be happy with it, but they could accept it. And you should take it because, again, if you don't take it, it is going to be, as you say, everything to the east of the Dnieper, and also the the coast of the Black Sea, including
Right.
Odessa and Nikolaev. It's just going to be that. It's just, but there's just no realism on the other side. It's just a lot of sloganeering. And but anyway, yeah, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about, yeah, but can they actually talk about these other things? And I think you make a very good point. I think you're to a great extent correct. With a war going on, there are a lot of things that you can't do, and unless, okay, the war could go on, but if the U.S. really does pull out of it, truly pulls out of it, then we could see progress on those other fronts. The problem, okay, but if it continues to be a proxy war, if the Russians see that the Americans are using this to essentially to bring them down, to do as much damage as they can to Russia, then the arms control treaties and so on and so forth, and the economic cooperation really becomes impossible. I think you're right, and in fact, the Russians pulled out a part of the START treaty, the New START, because for this very reason. They said, you are a hostile power. You demonstrated that you're actually, engaged in a war in us. And so we cannot actually continue to implement all of this treaty. And so, yeah, I think it becomes a real impediment to future arms control. Now, if the war continues, but the Americans pull out, and they truly pull out, then okay, that changes things. There are some things that they still can do, regardless of whether the war is going on, like restaffing the embassy, restoring, flights between the two countries, that kind of thing. And that does mean something. But I think you make a good point about how, yeah, the war can't be ignored. You can't. You do have to solve it, at least in part, before you go on to the other things.
Right. I mean, what I'm hoping comes out of this is that there is at least some proposed settlement. And Trump will probably know that the Europeans and Ukraine will reject it. Putin understands that as well. But they just say, we got to do this and give them a proposal for peace to say that this is what we agree on. And this is what the U.S. wants to see done. And if it doesn't get done and we don't get to this agreement, then we're out. And it gives Trump a way out. So, who knows exactly what it is that they agree on? Maybe it's the four oblasts, maybe it's something else. But there just needs to be something, even if there's a mutual understanding between both Putin and Trump that, like, what we're presenting here is just something that we know that so Ukraine's going to reject, Zelensky's rejecting, the Europeans are going to reject. Fine, that's what we want him to do. Then you can say, look, this is the plan that I gave you. You didn't want to take it, so we're out. We're not going to be part of this anymore. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think I think actually in the earlier episode I said that may be Putin's main objective. It's just that, yeah, again, giving Trump some kind of off ramp. A settlement's impossible, but if they can, if something can be, I don't know what it is really, but if there is, some kind of agreement, I think it could only be a partial agreement, but it's just some kind of agreement was reached that could be seen as a first step towards a total settlement. But it would be reached with the knowledge, at least on Putin's part, that Ukraine and the Europeans are going to reject it. And, he'll bank on that, and then they will reject it. And then it does make it easier. He's going to help just kind of just open the way for Trump, to move, to leave. And again, like I said, it's going to be hard for Trump to do that, but yeah, do everything you possibly can to make it easier to make that move. Again, I don't know exactly what that would be. I mean, we've heard about these talks about, at least, maybe having Ukraine actually withdraw from Donetsk, giving all of the Donbass, and then having further negotiations about the other oblasts. Now, I don't think that's actually would be a good idea. I would think like Putin probably wouldn't want the Ukrainians to agree to this. But he'll do something like that because he knows that the Ukrainians won't agree to it. And again, that shows, hey, I made this concession. You guys shot it down. What can we do? And again, that's Trump can echo that.
Right. Well, it sounds like it's only a matter of weeks, months before Russia has all of Donetsk already. Maybe you can give us a battlefield update. Maybe you can say what I said if you agree with that at all, because from my understanding, Pokrovsk is crumbling. It looks like they're making rapid movements now, like 10, 11 kilometers in a day. And it looks like they could do a giant cauldron for the rest of Donetsk soon if the way it's going.
Yeah, well, right. The dramatic news is it was yesterday that they broke through to the north of Pokrovsk and, like you said, advanced 10, 11 kilometers in a day, which is almost unheard of in this war, with the exception of the early weeks of the war. Now so they actually ended up in a place pretty much in between Konstantinivka, which is to the north, and Pokrovsk. So it actually it
or is
extends,
it Kramatorsk, right? Kramatorsk?
No, not Kramatorsk. No, that's farther to the north. Okay. It's Konstantinivka. Yeah. So it actually contributed to the siege of Konstantinivka at the same time that it contributes to the expanded and tightened the siege around Pokrovsk. I think by doing this they cut off another main supply route. And but the main thing is just the speed with which they did it. And I was reading a very careful analysis of this by Simplicius the Thinker. People point to the fact that, okay, there are just fewer Ukrainian soldiers. The morale is low, they're not as well armed, etc. This is all true. But apparently there's also been these tactical improvements on the Russian side that have forced the Ukrainians to reconfigure their defenses. It's just that they have become much better at, I think, locating and targeting fortifications on the Ukrainian side. And that has, so when the Ukrainians fire from these places, the Russians very quickly determine where the fire came from and then deliver, artillery or one of these glide bombs, the FABs, the FABs, and which are enormously destructive. It can just take out the entire fortification. And the Ukrainians have been forced to actually to reduce the size of their fortifications along the lines. So you have just basically a foxhole with 2 or 3 guys in a tree line or something, and to disperse some more. And then these guys are hunkered down most of the time because they're scared of revealing their location. So the Russians were able to penetrate. They sent small groups of men. We're talking about 2 or 3 at a time. They figured out where the Ukrainians were located, and they just passed between these foxholes, went deep into the rear, and then they joined up together behind them. So it's just like passing through a sieve, and then and then reassembling or assembling on the other side. And it happened there, north of Pokrovsk, but I think that's also what happened to the south of Pokrovsk, where they entered into the city itself, and they are now deep, in the center of the city. So the city is not only under siege, and the siege is continually tightening. They're actually in the city and actually cutting it into pieces, so that the Ukrainian forces in the city are they're not just being cut off from support in the rear, they're actually being cut off from each other. So it really looks very grim. It's clear that they're not going to be able to hold on to the city for very long. And it's also suggestive of just a general weakening of the Ukrainian lines.
Yeah, I heard, I believe from Colonel Douglas McGregor, that sometimes one of the reasons they go in fast as well is the Russians will come up to some defensive line trenches, but it's empty because there's not enough people to be manning them now. They just don't have enough men to fill them up, or maybe they're abandoning their posts, or because they realize that if they shoot their weapons, they're going to be killed. So they're like, what are we doing here? You just kind of start to wonder. So, what do you think this will have much of an impact, do you think, on the meeting in Alaska, if we see this sort of even more this continued rapid advance, and all of a sudden it's like more and more territories being taken,
Yeah,
that Trump is
probably,
like,
it's
look,
probably too late to have an effect on that. I mean, it's significant, but again, it doesn't hasn't received the coverage in the West that it should. Um, I think it'll have to be something even more dramatic before it really breaks through the news cycle and changes thing. I think it's too late to have a real effect. It should, but I don't think it will.
something that I was thinking about as well, just talking about how far the Russians will go, and if they don't come to this agreement with the four Oblasts, it's likely going to be more. And I think that the Russian army itself doesn't want to stop. I know if you're reading Western propaganda, you just think that they're being these human wave tactics and the morale is rock bottom. But I sent you a video a couple months ago from a show called Real Reporter about this Russian that lived in Canada and then went back to Russia when the SMO started because he felt just this patriotic duty, enlisted and became a drone operator. It was very fascinating. It was interesting listening to him because he spoke good English because he lived in Canada so long. But at the end, he made a statement. And he said that the army doesn't want to stop. Like they don't want a settlement. That the Russian army wants to keep going. That for them, this is a real work. He said this is a real work for a Russian man. And and this is not just a sentiment that he shares, that he knows that everybody in the army shares, that this is a moral patriotic duty, that they're defending, their homeland, and they're freeing their Russian speaking brothers and sisters, and they will not stop, that this is something that they're very determined, very driven. So I just think the military itself doesn't want to stop. So I think, if they don't cut this deal, I think that the advances are going to be much more rapid, and they're going to be taking a lot more territory very, very quickly. And then I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's likely, and how does this play
again,
out?
It's always hard to time these things. Like, it's just the same thing in economics. Like you can point to a collapse, or you can say the bubble's going to burst, and you can say that with great confidence, and the bubble does eventually burst. It happens. We've gone through all these economic cycles, and the people who predict that it will burst always are proven correct. And there are always some people that are just sort of pretend that it can't happen. It's going to always go on, and the economy is like is on a kind of an eternal ascent. But anyway, enough of that metaphor. It's just that but it's the same thing. It's just I with confidence, I can say there will be a tipping point. There will be some kind of collapse, and we may be right at that tipping point right now. I mean, it's just like you just look at the facts. It's just like the facts are that Ukraine is getting weaker and weaker. Both in terms of manpower and equipment, and the Russians are getting stronger and stronger again, both in terms of manpower and equipment. And if you, at some point, the gap, the strength of the Russian army versus the weakness of the Ukrainian army will be such that, the lines just can't hold it all. And in spite of all the Ukrainian efforts, and there will be a collapse. We'll see like what we just saw north of Pokrovsk, but up and down the line. And, maybe that's just around the corner. It's just, again, actually the timing, that question of when it's going to happen. It's just, I think it's always it's very difficult to predict. I'll just say, I think probably we'll see something, or we'll hit that tipping point before the end of this year. And it could be, again, even, much sooner, but I find it very, very difficult. There's so many times when I thought that maybe we were there. It just looks like we're, eventually we'll hit it. And I suspect that we're very close, but I don't know exactly how close we are.
Okay, well, assuming that we avoid World War III and an expansion of this conflict in Ukraine, and we get a Russian victory, who knows what exactly looks like, the four Oblasts probably plus. Why? What does that mean to the United States? Why does it scare the U.S.? Why does the U.S. think it just cannot lose this war? And I mean, just the West in general. Why are we so all in? Well, what do they think is going to happen once there's a Russian victory, and what will happen?
Yeah, well, this war was launched because we couldn't countenance, a powerful Russia, a real adversary in the world. This is something that the global hegemon just cannot tolerate. And, we've seen it, countries that truly resist, Iran, China, Russia, are the big ones. North Korea is another one, of course. They become, they become targets of hostility, of hostile action, and eventually, like in the case of Russia and the Iran war. Um, it's just it's the intolerance of the hegemon for any real adversary. Russia had to go. Russia was not bowing down. Russia was too powerful. It was Russia by being there and occupying so much of Eurasia was constraining American power or American-led Western hegemony, and preventing the realization of the global hegemonic dream. So this is something that they just can't let happen. And then if this is really the worst of all, it would have been better if they avoided war and continued to use soft power and color revolutions on the frontiers and the periphery, of Russia. But they actually went after him, and with great glee, they thought that they had him, right? With the economic sanctions and the war, they thought they were going to bring down Russia. Now they haven't, and that is so. It's not only that they failed to defeat Russia, but Russia will be stronger than ever, and Russia will be seen to have defeated them, and that is a kind of a nightmare. If your obsession is with global hegemony, that's a real nightmare. That's the end of your global hegemony, as as the organizer of the Munich conference said, tears streaming down his face. It's the end of the rules-based international order. I think that's it.
Okay, well then, will a Russian victory will it free America and the West from the burden of empire?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, potentially it could. Again, I say this is the end of Western-led hegemony, but it's not the end of America, and it could be quite the reverse. America should just cast this off. It's really a burden to the U.S. It's distorted our not just our foreign policy, but to a certain extent our domestic policies as well. And it's a burden on our economy. Yeah, we could be free. We could become a republic again, like we once were. A republic that did not go out in search of monsters to slay, as Adam said. We could, there's nothing to prevent that. It's just that, okay, I think the scary thing is these people again that lead the country, are by and large seem incapable of giving up that vision. And the danger is that they're going to lash out in new and dangerous ways. Now, there are reasons for hope. And that is, I think even, again, the Trump administration is so chaotic, but you are hearing voices that you never heard before. Like, I'm not a big fan of J.D. Vance. There are a lot of things that he does I don't like. But there is a kind of a certain realism that's entered and a willingness to at least give up parts of the empire that just wasn't there before. And I think maybe that's a sign of, maybe increasing realism to come. Let's hope so. Perhaps, we're seeing at least the beginnings of a new, more realistic and potentially humbler United States. But we're a long ways from there now.
Yeah, do you imagine then when a Russian victory is clear and it's been officially announced that okay, this is over, that we will be entering into a more stable, peaceful time, or that we will be kind of going to a more Cold War, high tension, new arms race time?
Well, it could very well be the latter. Again, it's just like the Europeans don't seem to be showing any willingness to to talk with the Russians to abandon their hostility to Russia.
What can the Europeans do? They're nothing. They
Yeah,
can't
right.
build, and they don't.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't have any
Yeah, yeah.
industry. They
So
don't have any
far,
military.
well, it's rather amazing. Again, if you look at like their economies in purchasing power terms, again, we're talking about the real economy supposedly. Um, Europe has 5 times, the economic output that Russia has. 5 times. So, Russia is just a puny little midget in economic terms compared to Europe, supposedly, according to the measures that we use. It would be even actually much more if we're talking about nominal GDP. Um, so in theory, they could outproduce the Russians 5-1, but we're not seeing that. We're well over 3 years into this war, and there's not a sign of that happening. And there's talk about that now, more and more talk about it coming from Merz and Rutte and so on and so forth. But we haven't seen anything. So you just wonder, yeah, can they even do it? They can. And yeah, so anyway, a clear Russian victory is going to be a real slap in the face. It's just, I think in the end, it seems like people, at least the leadership, is just cannot recognize the reality. They're still doubling down, on their initial understanding of the way this war is supposed to end. It's supposed to end with a Ukrainian NATO victory. Russia is supposed to collapse economically and politically. There's supposed to be regime change, and they haven't abandoned that original vision, but it's just becoming increasingly absurd. And so there's just all more of the same. So now, they recently imposed the 18th sanctions package. Now they're working on the 19th. They're just
I heard when they get to 20, it'll work. That's the
yeah, right.
that's the number
of
they need to
course.
get to.
That's right. Yeah. And then, or maybe when it doesn't work, it'll be when they get to 50, or we get, who knows. But anyway, they're still in this, living out this absurd vision, but they haven't abandoned it. They just haven't, right? It's just like there's really no, occasionally you hear something. Again, when the dissident media, I think, it's good that we point out this when somebody says something like a bit of realism is injected, but by and large, it's just not there. Now, if there is just a real defeat, maybe that will be the wake-up call. And again, the thing is, it just can turn different directions. We see some disturbing signs of increasing militarism, maybe not within the people. It's like, I think the German people said they wouldn't even fight for their own country, but Merz and so on, you just don't sometimes, the political leadership he seems to want to create the Fourth Reich or something. And again, I would say he's like typecast to do it. And a lot of these other, Macron, Starmer, all of them, they really seem to hunger for war, but they just don't have it. Now, can they make good on it? Can they transform their societies? I don't think so, but they're going to try. And the hope is that they're just going to fall flat on their face. Everybody will ridicule them, and maybe people will be elected to replace them. Now,
Yeah, it is such a strange thing to me still. I know we've talked about so many times just how all these leaders are so for this war, even though it's a very unpopular position to take. All of the leaders in the West are incredibly unpopular, and it's largely due to their stance on the war in Ukraine. Even the Ukrainian people themselves, 70% of them are saying we want an immediate end to this war and we're okay with losing territory. So you just, the will of all of the people around the world, there's an overwhelming consensus. We don't want this war. This war has been devastating to all of us. It's hurt us economically, not to talk about just the human loss of life for the Ukrainians. And this needs to end. Everybody's under that agreement. But for some reason, all of the leaders just won't let it go, even though it's an unpopular position. And I just find that just strange that I just was thinking that they would be looking for a way out. Thank God. Okay, yeah, Trump says that, okay, we got to leave. Thank goodness we don't want to do this war anymore. Let's get out of it. But it's not the case. It's the opposite. And I just find that strange. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, it is strange. It is strange. And again, it is irrational. And sometimes it can be very hard and, if not impossible, to explain. It is a kind of group thing. There's no question about it. That I think what you find like throughout the West, it's just like it's it begins with education and everything. You rise to the top. You learn that you need to adopt certain kinds of attitudes. Very early on, like in high school, the people that are climbing and aiming for the top, often the more intellectually gifted among them, they understand what a so-called smart person, successful person, what kind of opinions he has, right? What he's supposed to have anyway. And they adopt them. I think, maybe not consciously, perhaps in some cases, maybe initially consciously, and then it becomes just second nature and they stop even questioning it. It's just like, that's what all the smart people think. It really is, and so, yeah, we've established this group thing throughout the West. And unfortunately, it's a group think that in the end it's divorced from reality. A healthy society has leaders that are, who are fully aware of the realities and are, working to address the real problems and so on. But we have people that are, again, are devoted to these certain globalist principles, and it just distorts their understanding of the world. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we can end it there. Well, actually, you just arrived in Sochi.
Correct.
I don't have anything to say. You just got out. Just got to the hotel, right?
Right. Yeah. Just arrived to from the airport to the hotel. Yeah. It doesn't look like Russia outside. I mean, it's just there's palm trees and there's and mountains, and of course I know that parts of Russia are quite mountainous, but up until now I've been up in the north where the topography is very flat, and there certainly aren't any palm trees, so it doesn't feel Russian, but of course it is. That's what I've seen is, I think I prefer the cities that I've been to in the north because they have more history, and this is a very modern city, but it's clean, it's pretty. The mountains on one side and the sea on the other. We're staying in a very nice hotel here, and I'm sure we'll enjoy it. We'll spend time on the beach, and we'll go up into the mountains too.
Okay, we'll take some pictures and videos.
I will.
I'll share a few.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Dad. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.